Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast. Today I've got a really special guest. His name is Nick Lamagna, jiu-jitsu black belt, Golden Gloves boxer, real estate investor. I mean, guys, I can't wait for you to listen to all the value you're going to get from this episode as Nick shares his story and what took him from MMA to a hand injury, fighting through all that, investing in real estate. We're in the same family mastermind. Nick, how are you today?
I am fantastic, man. I am very excited to be on your podcast. Very long overdue because you're a wealth of knowledge, man. I'm excited that you're putting yourself out there a little bit more. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Love that. Nick also does the A Game podcast, right, Nick?
Yes, sir.
All right. The A Game podcast, guys. I was a guest on Nick's podcast, I think about 8 or 10 months ago. Nick interviews some really high-level people that you're going to want to go check out both on YouTube and in podcasts. So please go check that out. That's the A Game podcast. So Nick, to start things off, the theme of this show is about real freedom and fighting through failure. What is your biggest failure?
Man, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I feel like you get a different answer every single day you ask me. But I'd say probably I'm my own biggest failure, that I have not reached my true potential, because I think I just got off a podcast. Actually, we were talking about self-sabotage. And I think every time I'm about to hit like a new plateau in my life or my business, I find a way to go back to where I was. And I get that fear of, probably more fear of success. There's your answer. My fear of success is my biggest fear of failure.
I love that answer. We also call that imposter syndrome. I've dealt with that a little bit too. When in your life do you notice that that's really applicable, right? Because life is a series of peaks and valleys. And so you're saying sometimes the fear of those peaks can even be more daunting than going through the valleys.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it comes up, it rears its ugly head on multiple occasions. Like, for an example, like putting kind of both of them, because I find a lot of parallels between fighting in business and life. It all kind of like weaves together. And, one of my favorite quotes is, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I remember it's almost like when I would go to a tournament or like go to like a boxing match, and you look around at all these other guys from all these other schools or all these other gyms, and you think like, man, like they all look a lot bigger and stronger than they really are. And you think like, they know something I don't know. They must be training something I've never trained. And I'm going to get in there and I'm going to look like an idiot. And I'm going to get my butt kicked. And I'm going to embarrass my coaches. And you think there's this like secret thing that you're missing that everybody else knows about but you. And you're like the guy who doesn't belong in there and you can't hold your own. And then you lock up and you're like, oh, like I'm at a great gym with great people and I know what I'm doing just as much as anybody else. And this is just like training with my training partners every day. It's just in front of different people at a different place. And I think that happens a lot too. Like when you go into like a family mastermind, or you come on a podcast and you're talking to somebody else that's like successful, and you're thinking like, Ryan doesn't deal with imposter syndrome. Ryan doesn't deal with like fear of failure or fear of success, or like he's amazing. And then you realize like everybody's just people. And, I noticed it too. Recently I've been hiring and firing a lot recently as we come to like the end of the year and the beginning of the new year. And when you're training people and telling them to do stuff, you almost feel like an imposter saying like, just do this and you'll get the deal. Like, just say this and change the course. Like, no's are okay. And like, they look back and they look at you and you have to be like, no, like this is the right thing to do. You have to do this. You have to trust me. And then they wind up getting deals and you wind up getting that reassurance. But I think anytime you have that comparison and you just, I don't know, it always feels like the other person. Every real estate investor I see on Instagram posting every day, they know something I don't know. They're doing deals they've never had a bad deal. They've nenever had a bad day. And then there's that kind of sense of like, no, everybody's just people. So I think that it pops up in multiple ways, multiple days, and multiple aspects of my life.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say social media can really be tricky with that, right? A lot of people only talk about their successes. That was one of the themes that we wanted to cover when we started the show, is like, let's talk about the real shit. Not the fancy, glamorous, like you get enough of that on Instagram and YouTube. Let's talk about really what separates people that are kind of being fake about it and like the real ones. Because every time that I go to a mastermind, and I'm sure that you can attest to this too, just like I'm sure it was when you're going on a fighting circuit or you're going to a big UFC fight, the people that are most successful have been through the most shit. Like there's a direct correlation with the harder people fail to their level of success. So I do want to ask about that MMA background. and the correlation of that into real estate investing and the segue there in comparison. But what led you down that path to even think about punching someone's face in on a regular basis?
You know, it's interesting because it's probably not what the way most people would go into it for like what you would think. I remember I was a power lifter, and I remember like I was just benching and working out. And, you know, at that time I didn't know any better. And I'm thinking like the more weights I can lift, like, you know, and I'm in college, so like your testosterone's through the roof. And it's like, well, if I can lift a lot of weights, that must mean I can protect myself in the case of a situation. And then I remember my brother was like, hey man, I've been boxing. It's a great workout. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me try boxing. So I went down to this guy, Chris, and we started boxing. And I remember just being so humbled by the workout of like thinking, like, I'm in great shape. And then like 30 seconds into a bag workout, I was like, I cannot lift my arms up. It just blew me away. So it was difficult. And then it was one of those things of like, well, do you just quit now and go do everything that's easy, or do you show up tomorrow and try and do a little bit better? So I started just getting better, and I was like, okay, I'm going to drink a little bit less. And it actually really helped me with health because I realized it's already going to be hard enough getting good at this, let alone eating Big Macs every day and drinking beer every night. So I started getting my health together and really focusing on like, I'm not going to let that get the better of me. I'm going to get better at that. And I started getting better at like hitting the bags and doing pad work and stuff and moving my head and learning the footwork. And then I remember we sparred for the first time ever, which, backing this up, if you go to like a good gym now, like you go to Ray Longo's, I remember I went there with fights, and they still were like, you're going to take a bunch of classes before you ever hit anybody. And then when you do start hitting, you're going to do like lead head jabs, and then you're only going to hit to the body, and then eventually do like play sparring. Like, it's going to be a long time before you actually fight somebody. And the old gyms that I was in, it was like, you've been here for 3 weeks. Let's see if you're tough or not. We're going to kick your ass and see if you come back tomorrow. So it was like, there was nothing but tough guys there, but the business model was terrible. You know what I mean? So like there was no money in it. So I remember I went there and I'm thinking, I benched 315 or whatever it was at that time. And I'm thinking, I'll let this guy take a couple of swings at me, and then I'll just hit him and I'll just lay him out. And like the first time I was hit by a boxer, dude, it was way different than like one of those crazy things that happens at a bar when you're in college. I was like, he hit me, and like I went into immediate panic mode. I was like, this is terrible. Like all of my alarms went off. I covered up, and I remember just thinking like how is this possible that this like 152-pound guy just hit me, and it felt like I got hit by a 400-pound gorilla. And then I remember I just closed my eyes as the bell was about to ring, and I swung as hard as I could, and he backed off. And I remember thinking, I got him. And I look up and he's holding his nuts, and I was like, oh no. I was like, I'm in like real trouble. And I spent like the last 30 seconds literally just running away. I was like, I'm sorry. So he like kicked my ass. And I remember my thought as soon as I got hit was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I can't wait to get out of here. And when I leave, I am never coming back. And then I remember that night I went home and I was like, how did you let that happen? And like, you can't go out like that. And like, I had to, and then every day until the next week, he was like, you're coming back next week to spar. And I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Like, I was so stressed out about going and getting my ass kicked the next week. And I thought of every excuse in the book to give him to not go. And then I showed up anyway, and I did better. Like, I still got my ass kicked, but I did better. But when I left there, the feeling I had of being so scared to do something, but doing it anyway, to me was like, man, it would have taken, I know everybody talks about like the slight edge principle, but it's like, those are the things where it's very easy to say, I have a million excuses why it's not healthy for me to get punched in the face today, but I have one excuse to go there and face that fear. And then like that got me going like, so it wasn't even about the fighting. It was about that I sucked so bad at it and scared me so much that it was like the only thing that was challenging me and keeping me alive and making me feel like I grew every time I did it. So I started going back, and then I started getting good, and then I started taking fights. And then I had that hand injury, and I went through like a year or two of surgeries. And I remember thinking, if I would have taken more fights, I should have done more spar. Like all the things that now that you can't do something, you look back and you're like, I would give anything to be able to go get my ass kicked right now. And now I can't. So if I can ever get back to the point where I am able to box, like I am going to take fights, I'm not going to make excuses. You know, you start regretting all the things that you didn't do that you took the easy way out on. So I got back, and then because of the hand injury, I was like, well, if I'm down a hand, let me learn how to kickbox. Let me know how to do like Muay Thai and stuff. You can use elbows and feet. And then I started complementing that with I can't get hit in the head every day, so let me start doing jujitsu. So then I started doing like boxing one day, jujitsu the next day, then kickboxing one day, then jujitsu the next day. Then I started doing some jujitsu tournaments. Then I started doing some amateur boxing matches. And then an amateur MMA card came up in New Jersey. And eventually I had the right opportunity, which is a whole other story about how I got this like rare opportunity to jump on a fight card because Ray Longo asked me for a favor. And I went in and fought on an MMA card, and kind of never looked back.
I love that. How'd you do in that fight?
The first fight I lost a close decision. But yeah, I fought a wrestler. It was a great, and this is like when MMA was still illegal in New York. So you had to like hop on a car and like drive to New Jersey. It was just a great experience. Part of one of the reasons I started doing that was like Matt Serra was getting ready to fight George St. Pierre. Actually, that was the second fight, which I won. And but that fight, I remember it was like, I was watching these guys that were getting ready, and like, it's weird because these guys are getting ready for fights. So as much as like Matt's teaching classes, like now it's a little bit different because they're kind of retired and that their school is like their retirement. But when these guys are getting ready for their fights, like it's not easy for them to pay attention to you because they got their own thing to worry about. So I was like, how do I get in on this and be around for like really the high level training? Because there would be times where Longo would say, like, look, if you don't have a fight coming up or you're not training a fighter for a fight, get out. And they would kick everybody out of the gym and lock the doors. And only the fighters could really stay. And I was like, how do I get behind those doors? And so the way you get behind the doors was to take a fight. So like my whole thing was like, even if I get my ass kicked, like I want to fight around the time that Matt's fighting St. Pierre because I want to be part of that fight camp. Even if I'm not directly training with him, I'm there the same times. Like I'm sparring in the ring and like literally the timer goes off and we just, me and the guy I'm sparring would turn around and we just watch Matt fight in the cage like 10 feet from us. Like, so I got to watch like free UFC fights like 3 or 4 times a week. And now you start to work with guys and drill with guys and they get a different kind of respect for you. You get to meet them on another level. And then you build these bonds with these guys that turn out later on to be these UFC champions like Aljamain Sterling and Ali Quinta and Chris Weidman and all those things. So all that stuff to like just go in, that's really where my relationships were really like kind of solidified. It wasn't just the training room. It was like that extra mile kind of very similar thing with businessman. So it was an interesting time and probably a different path in, but man, like I look back and I'm like, those are the good old days, man. Like the fact that we sit around sometimes. And I remember when it was like one of Wyman's last sparring sessions and they like kicked everybody out. And Matt was like, hey, like stick around, you and Coop. And we stuck around. He's like, man, you guys like family. Like, you can stay here. And we were like sitting around the cage and they brought in all these other like high level UFC fighters to like mimic Lyoto Machida. And it's like me and Matt and like the UFC cameras and like a bunch of fighters and like Henzo Gracie. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I have no business being in the room. But you're like sitting in a room with your heroes 3 to 4 times a week. And now they become your friends, man. Like, it's pretty amazing. And that was worth getting punched in the face a few times a week to be able to get in on that.
So you and I are both big UFC fans. What's something in peeking behind the curtain that most people don't really realize about either the business aspect of it or the fight camps? What are some things behind the scenes that go on?
Man, you know, it's probably a lot like real estate and kind of like the deal that you see them close. There was 100 deals that didn't go through or 100 sleepless nights or lenders that backed out or people that backed out of that contract before you see the Instagram thing. So I always talk about like life is a recipe of all the decisions that you've made up until this point today. So when you see Aljamain Sterling fighting Sean O'Malley, defending his UFC title and going to Abu Dhabi, he's able to fight that night, but it had nothing to do with the fight that night. It was every meal that he ate leading up to that fight camp. It was every round of sparring. It was every day he woke up at 5 o'clock instead of speaking up until 7 o'clock. It was the parties you miss. It was all those other things like the training camps that you did for months that the fight never even happened, like the injuries that people never even hear about leading up to that. The fact that to get to the point where you are an Aljamain Sterling or a Chris Weimer, you're getting these, like, dude, I remember going to Chris Weidman's first fight in Atlantic City. And I think these guys were like, I mean, same training, if not tougher. Like in those days when you're fighting in like a gym that was like a jungle, you know what I mean? Like people were just coming in and beating the crap out of each other until one person couldn't stand it anymore. Like there was no light sparring. Like you were beating the trash out of each other on a daily basis. And if you manage to get through that, now you go to New Jersey and you fight. And if these guys are lucky, they're getting like $3,000 to show up and $3,000 if they win. You know, maybe some like sponsorship money here or there. And like you're not to get to the point you are like, to have to fight for nothing is insane. You know what I mean? So you have to go through these smaller shows. And what you look at now is those guys that make it to the UFC. If you see like, I mean, it blew me away when we'd be sparring for, I remember for the Golden Gloves, like Aljamain was one of my sparring partners and this other dude, Guillotine Ryan. And I remember like we'd be boxing, like I'd be trying to hit him and like I'd be swinging and he was gone. And I would swing again and he's gone. Like, and I can't touch the guy. And I'm like, how is this guy? And then you watch him fight like even a decent pro and he's getting his ass whooped. And like, that's when you realize the food chain of like, even the crappy guy at the gym, what he can do to like, it's just insane to watch. So those guys that are at that level, it drives me nuts when you see somebody criticizing the Aljamain or Chris Weidman or anybody on that level, because to get to that level that they are, to realize how good they act. Like you watch Chris Weidman at a gym and he's tearing through 99% of everybody there with ease. And then he gets in the ring with somebody and they knock him out in like a minute or two. I'm always like, how good is that guy?
Yeah.
What kind of animal is that dude? Like, so the food chain on that level, if you don't realize like your shittiest USC fighter on that roster, how good that guy actually is and how much he went through in the background to get even to that shot. I mean, it's the equivalent of somebody who plays stickball on the streets in Brooklyn and somebody who's a starter for the New York Yankees. Like they're both baseball players, but how did that other guy get to that level? Like that's probably like one of the biggest things there. And another thing I'll say that I think is a major part that gets forgotten is as much as UFC and MMA fighting and jiu-jitsu and stuff is like an individual sport that you have to be the guy going there and fighting. I will tell you the atmosphere and the community and the camaraderie with your friends and your training partners changes everything, much like family mastermind. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. When you're in the right room and you just know you're in the right room, I think that chemistry is unbelievable. And, you know, I bounce at different gyms. And when I found like Matt Serra, I found my tribe, I found my people. And there's something to be said about like the MMA and the jiu-jitsu community where not that it's unheard of or it doesn't happen, but I think it's a lot harder to find a guy who's like a dickhead with a big ego, even if they play the Conor McGregor on TV. Like behind closed doors, I'm betting most of those guys aren't like that. They're just trying to pull that because you don't last long in those days. Like the mindset of every day having to be the hammer and then having to be the nail. And like you could have a great round and you're tapping everybody and you're hitting everybody and you're getting out of the way of every punch and you feel great. And then the bell rings and they go, switch partners. And then they switch. And then that guy just kicks your ass. And you're like, man, like, so it's very hard to get too high and it's very hard to let yourself get too low. So I feel like it teaches a nice balance of humility. And then when you have the right training partners and coaches around you to keep you honest and keep you humble, but also help you celebrate those wins, I think that is the difference between the guys that really reach the elite level, just like they would in business, is surrounding yourself with the right people that don't look at you like you can't have a gym of people that are constantly have a chip on their shoulder because you have something that they don't. You have to be inspired by that and learn from that and constantly say, what am I not doing that Chris Weidman's doing to help me be a champion? Like it's, you know, so you have to take accountability and you have to be willing to always be learning and always be a student of the game because it's an always evolving process, just like real estate is.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear the team aspect. This is an individual sport, but it really requires X number of coaches, nutrition, you got your sparring partners. It's like the whole camp is in it together, right? And the person that's fighting is an extension of your fight camp and your team. I played college football, but there's something about going into a situation where you can be physically harmed that I think ties you. I mean, you talk about the Navy SEALs and the Army and Navy and Air Force and Marines and all of our armed forces. But the fact that if you don't do your job, somebody else can be physically harmed, I think that binds you closer together than words can really explain. And it sounds like you get quite a lot of that in these fight camps. And I can see why it's really attractive to somebody to join and go through that failure, is because you get that sense of team and it's just on another level, your bond.
I agree with that 1,000%. You know, it's interesting. My brother is a musician. I remember when he started getting into jiu-jitsu and a bunch of guys got promotions and everybody was like, hell yeah, man. Like, that's awesome. Congratulations. Like, you earned that. You deserve that. And I remember he was like, you know, I wish my friends in music celebrated each other's wins as much as they do as my friends in jiu-jitsu. And I think about that a lot too, where like so many other people in life, they don't support each other or hold each other accountable. And when a guy's on the mat every day, like, you know who's putting in the time and who's not. I think the old cliche is like the mats don't lie or the cage doesn't lie. Like when you get in there, you know if you did your job or not. You know if you put the training in. You know if you took shortcuts or not. And everybody's going to see it. Like you get exposed every day. So like if you're not showing up and you're taking shortcuts, and Ryan is showing up every day and kicking butt and taking names and doing stuff, like when he's now better than you or getting accolades that you didn't get or getting promotions you don't deserve, you know he earned that and you're happy for him. You're not jealous and you go, I'm watching another guy do it. Now I know what it takes. I'm going to get off my ass and I'm going to do better. And I think that's where a lot of when you see guys, like I know I felt it, like the first fight that I had, even though it was like a close fight, I didn't get beat up or anything, but I think if you talk to most fighters, they're not scared of getting beat up. most of them, I think when you talk to them, like our biggest fear, like I'm not even, I wouldn't even consider myself like a fighter compared to these guys, but it always comes to, I'm more scared of like getting tired. You know, to me, that would be like the worst thing in the world of like knowing that I cheated on the conditioning and I gassed out in the middle of the fight. And now I showed up and I look like shit. And the reason that was so important to me is because I knew when I was going in there, I was representing Matt Serra and Ray Longo and my training partners. And you don't want to go in there and wave that flag and say, like, this is the team I'm representing. And I just represented them like shit. Like that to me was like such a something that you have to carry. And that's why, like, if there was something coming up and I couldn't fully prepare for it, I didn't want to do it, even though people were like, oh, you probably be okay. It's like, yeah, but if I'm not and I go in there and I look like crap, now I'm a representative of you. And now I make you look like crap. So I think part of that, like, emotional release sometimes when you see if somebody loses a fight or it doesn't go well, it's not that like I'm upset that I lost on the lower levels. It's I let the people around me down that just helped me out for the last 4, 8, 12 weeks. The people that believed in me, the people that trained in me, like you feel like you did them a disservice because you care so much about the people who care for you.
That is such a good point. When the fights get scheduled, I'm always curious how in the world they pick who and what location. And ultimately, I know it's entertainment, right? And so they, based on viewership, based on ticket sales, based on money, that's how these decisions get made. But I'm just curious, like, how much of a heads up or say do these fighters have in who they go up against and the location and the timing of it all?
I think on the lower level circuits, like on the level I was fighting on, it was kind of like, hey, you're going to fight this guy. He's about your weight. He's about your experience. But then when you show up that day, it's kind of like, ah, you guys are about the same weight. There's only 3 over there and 2. You're going to fight him. Like, so like it almost got switched every single time. Like the Golden Gloves, I remember I sat there all day long and like, you're just in this room with all these animals and you're like, man, every person in here looks pretty scary. And then like 30 minutes before that, then they were like, Lamagna, you're up. You're going to fight that guy, glove up. And you're like, who's that guy? You're like, oh man. So like, but as you get to some of the other levels, I think they slowly start to match you up like on the local circuits with people that are obviously your weight class and your experience level within a fight or two. And then, you know, you win a couple of fights and they give you somebody else that's got like a, you know, a 3-1 record, a 4-0 record. And then they start to build you up. And then somewhere probably, which I'm seeing around like that, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 fight mark, you get a title shot on a local show, on a regional circuit. And then you start to become a champion. Now that you're becoming a champion, now some of these other bigger promotions, they start to call in because you have other guys that are in your gym that are fighting for UFC or for Bellator, or for PFL or for Cage Fighting Fury. So all of a sudden now, the way I see it happen mostly is somebody gets hurt on a UFC card, somebody gets hurt on a PFL card, somebody doesn't show up on a Bellator card, and they go, hey, so-and-so, we got 3 weeks. We need somebody last minute. Is Weimer willing to step in? Is that person? So it's kind of like one of those like be ready, stay ready, prove yourself on the local circuits, and then they'll give you a shot. And I think a lot of our guys now, prior to the Contender Series, because the Contender Series now, they'll kind of take some of those guys that were like higher level on the local circuits and they'll give them like a platform on the UFC and it'll be kind of those up and comers. It's like the minor leagues. But prior to that, it really did become like, be ready. They'll give you a shot. And part of that is if you lose, we'll give you another shot on a full camp because you kind of saved their ass on this one card. And when that happens, sometimes the matchups are terrible. Like I think Weimer got in for his first fight on there and he fought like Alessio Sakara, who had like a whole bunch of fights. I think my buddy Dennis Bazookas got the call on like 2 days notice or something like that versus that guy Caleb who was like 6'4" or something. So sometimes you're getting in there on like a short notice fight, but it's your ticket to the big show. Like that guy, who is it? Was it Sean O'Malley who fought that green haired guy on like a 2-day notice? And like, I mean, the guy put up a good fight, but it was like, come on, it was like a 1,400 to 1 or something like that. You know, it's like that stuff kind of happens sometimes. But then I think when you get to that higher level, it becomes more of a business. That's when I think the managers get involved and they do it a little bit for like, what would make an exciting style. And I think that's where like the Joe Silvas of the world come in and like the Sean, I forget his name offhand, but like the UFC matchmakers and them, I think 100% they run it out of business now. And unfortunately, I think if you look at the way they do it, not only do they set up matchups business-wise in favor of the guys they like, I think sometimes they'll set up those guys that they kind of want out for unfavorable matchups so they can go, oh, you know, sorry, you lost 2 now. Like I'm sure that like Colby Covington probably won't get like the most like stylistic matchup for him if they want him out. So it does become a bit of it, but it's super frustrating to watch because there's guys in our gym that I know could be like champions or to like, honestly, like not to get too, like, of course I'm going to look biased at it, but the whole way they handled Aljo, man, with the O'Malley fight, it was like, dude, how do you not like this guy? He's in there, he's winning fights, he's finishing people. What you want is eyes. Like whether or not you love him or hate him, people are watching. People are commenting on his stuff. People are cheering him or booing him. Like, the guy's selling tickets. The guy's keeping it fun. He's keeping it entertaining. And he's a freaking amazing fighter. But they just wanted Sean O'Malley so bad. And they kind of set him up for failure by making him take the short notice fight, which was, I think, one of the top 2 turnarounds of any other one, because they wanted their golden boy Sean O'Malley to win on the Boston card. Now, Aljo could have said no, but they kind of put outside pressure on you to kind of say yes. And then eventually he was like, you know what? I am going to take it and I'm going to shove it up your ass. And you guys are going to give me a big payday. And then I'm going to take a big vacation. And it didn't work out for him, you know? And then now it becomes Sean O'Malley's going, well, I'm not giving you a rematch. Like all these other ones, like they'll tie up those divisions for years with the trilogy, the third fight, the fourth fight, the Brandon Moreno, but the second you're not their guy, it's no, sorry, what have you done for me lately? And I don't like that side of that business at all. You know, I'm sure there's times that it plays into our favor, but I've seen it like be very unfair because, you know, it's a business. And kind of parlaying on that last part is, I remember when Matt Serra went into this is kind of probably the other thing you were asking. I remember when Matt Serra went in the Ultimate Fighter years ago, and he was talking about getting on the show. And I was talking to somebody that worked with the networks, and they were like, the same way with the HGTV flip this house shows, they don't actually care how many houses you flip. They just care, are you good for TV? It was like that. Like there was guys that got on that show that were like 2-0, 3-1, but they had drinking problems and red mohawks. So it wasn't really up to the UFC. It was Spike TV saying, these are the guys we want on that show. So you could have been a 100-0 fighter who's like literally going to be the next UFC champion. But if you're not marketable, you don't get that shot, which is, I mean, if you were the world's best baseball player, the Yankees are going to not get you a shot if you're the best pitcher in baseball because they don't like the way you look. That's, I think, a very big difference between MMA, UFC, and other sports that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I can fully see that, right? I mean, if you got pink or green hair and a bunch of tattoos and say a bunch of ridiculous stuff, you all of a sudden become more marketable, right?
Yep.
You're interesting. So and interesting gets clicks and gets eyeballs. And I think it really is a shame that it comes to that sometimes where it's really not about being the best. It's about being the best known. And if they're going to pick a person and pump them all the marketing dollars and put them on commercials and put them on just highlight reels after highlight reels and replays, then they know exactly what they're doing. They're feeding the machine, and fair or not, it does take the sport element out of it a little bit. And it becomes more of a spectacle, kind of what boxing turned into, which is why people started tuning out and looking for something new, which was UFC. And so I really have hopes that it doesn't go too far, because that is the reason why boxing lost its flair. It just became so over the top that none of the fights themselves were no longer interesting.
So, I agree. Especially like the way that they had just so many different weight classes and so many different divisions. Like you couldn't really, it was hard to figure out, like it almost devalued all of them. And I know they talk a lot about adding weight class to the UFC, but I think they've done a very good job of, like, in boxing, if you throw a bunch of names at me, except for the heavyweights, it's very hard to be like, what's middleweight again? What's welterweight? What's cruiserweight? Like people don't really know who these guys are and where they fight from. Whereas in the UFC, for the most part, you know, like it was a big deal to be like, Conor McGregor might fight at 185. Like, you know, and I feel like it's like that because there's not weight classes every 10 pounds and 4 or 5 belts per weight class. You know what I mean?
100%. The scarcity element definitely makes it more special, just like anything. How in the world does somebody stay at a moment's notice with the weight cuts fight ready? From people that I've talked to and heard from, that's one of their least favorite parts about MMA is just the gnarly weight cuts and how horrible that can be. And of course, some guys struggle at it more than others, but how does somebody manage it? That's kind of like the unspoken thing about all this is the training is one thing, but then you got to do these drastic weight cuts. I mean, that's got to take everything out of you.
Man, I really feel like years from now, we're going to look back at the way that they did weight cutting. And I think that we're going to look back and think it's going to be like barbaric. Like it's just, there's no way it can be good for your body. There's no way that there's longevity in it. If you watch like some of the specials, there's some footage out there about it. But I think one of like the ones that stick out the most to me was when Weidman fought Damian Maia on really, really short notice. I think he had to cut like 38 pounds in like 10 days or something like that. So it's like on top of the fact that like, I really should be training jujitsu to fight Damian Maia. I should be training everything because I'm going to get into a fight. I have to physically get my body ready. I have to get my timing ready. Like there's a much different shape between being in shape and being in fighting shape. Like the way you take punches, the way you react, the way your body is, the way your timing is. Like when you first start a new camp and you take a shot, like you're still kind of flinching and blinking, and like you have to get all these things back. And now you throw in, you have to literally put yourself in a position, as I think Joe Rogan said, like you're depleting yourself to the point where you're like on death's door. And then right after that, where you can barely move, where they have to literally carry you on and off the scale, 24 hours later, you're supposed to be fully refreshed. And now you're having a fist fight. Like you shouldn't even be exercising like under normal circumstances. So I think it's got to be terrible for your mind, for your body, for everything. But I think one of the biggest things I've seen happen is like guys lose it. They say it all the time. Like the fight's made or lost on the scale, which I think is part of why Aljo's like, dude, it's not worth doing anymore. Like you take the Frankie Edgars and the Vincent Hendersons and they fight closer to their natural weight. And it's like, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit smaller, but outweighing what? They don't have to have this horrible weight cut and deplete myself and like be miserable. And then you get the other side, the Chael Sonnens, who are like, that misery is part of what makes you so tough that day. Like, so I could see it going both ways. But I remember I went to, shout out to my buddy Eddie Truck Gordon. He was the winner of the Ultimate Fighter one season and good buddy of mine. But I remember we went and we watched him fight. I think it was like Josh Salmon, who I think actually passed away after the fight. But Truck got kicked in the head and got knocked out. And we were like, damn, dude. And when you go to see your friends fight and it loses, it just sucks, dude. You just want to go to your hotel room and go to like, you just feel so bad for them. But he was a great sport. And we went out and we were talking either that night or the next morning. And I remember him saying, like, dude, I don't get it. Like, I'm in the gym every day. John Vellante and Chris Weimer are head kicking me every day. He's like, and I take it like no problem. Like, I still keep going. I've never gotten like rocked like that, let alone knocked out like that. And then it became to like the weight cut. Like the guy used to walk around at 300 pounds. Now he's fighting at 170. And when you deplete your brain like that, it doesn't have the time to rehydrate. And those shots that you probably could have taken a week or two, guys are getting the lights put out because there's no fluid around the brain to protect those shots, which now goes into like what CTE, concussions, like how much worse is that now aside from what it's doing to your body about what those shots are doing to your brain because you don't have that inner protection. So I think that there's tons of negative to it. Like as much as an advantage of the game it is now, I think it's going to be looked back on as a disadvantage at some point and probably something that they're already regulating it with making some of these things. Like I think in one, you can only put on like 10% of whatever the weight you like. There's a thing that they'll actually do weigh-ins and you can't get too big because it'll keep guys, dude, because I think you want to talk about a surprise. People who don't follow UFC like tightly, if you've never met a UFC fighter, you will be blown away when you watch the weights these guys fight at, and then you meet them in person. You're like, you fight at 155? Like, are you kidding? You're like 212 pounds. Like it's nuts how huge these guys are and how, like when they get off the scales, the way that they're, it's crazy, dude. It's nuts.
How do you determine, for somebody listening to this that might be interested in joining a gym or trying to figure out what weight class is most optimal for them, how in the world do you go about deciding that?
So I think the first question would be the gym, and I tell people always makes, I always want to say like when I was your age, but like when I was starting out, dude, there was like 2 jujitsu gyms. There was like 1 or 2 boxing gyms around. There wasn't like an MMA gym like that you can get now. So everybody has so many more options now for jujitsu gyms, for MMA gyms. Like there's so much more stuff out there and the training is so much better that like, it's going to be the rare exception that somebody has to worry about going in new to learn and getting hurt or getting beat up. And Longo always says that he's like, I'll protect you to the day you die if you're coming in here to just better yourself and get in shape and get a workout and be a part of the gym. But once you sign on the dotted line to fight, now I have to take care of you in a different way. You know what I mean? Like now I do have to put you in harm's way. I have to make sure that you're going to be able to hit back and all these different things. So what I tell people is if you're looking for a gym, what I would do now starting out is I would look for like 3 to 5 gyms in my area. And I would go do like a week, maybe even like 2 weeks. They'll all give you kind of like passes to try stuff out, but go train there, take some different classes, meet the people you're training with. And after the course of like 2 months, 2.5 months of doing that, you're at some point going to say, I know which one's my people. Like, cause that's what you're looking for. It's almost like masterminds, dude. There's so many of them out there and there's ones that are great, but there's the ones that you're going to leave those ones and you'll be like, dude, that's my guy. Like Ryan's my dude. Like that's my people right there. You're going to feel that from your gym. And that's going to be the place that you have a much better experience at, because that's going to be the place where you have these friends that you just connect with, that you want to go there because you want to see these guys, you train with them. It's fun to be there. They're going to keep you honest. They're not going to let you take the easy way out. So you want to find that energy and that atmosphere, the right music, the right way they talk, because sometimes coaches don't know how to coach everybody. Sometimes they only know how to be like that Mickey in the corner and be mean and be tough. And that works for some guys, but it doesn't work for other guys. Pick up your hands and fight asshole. Like that wouldn't work for me. You know what I mean? But like Ray Longo and Matt Serra is so good at understanding a great coach knows how to get the best out of their fighter. And you have to say that in different ways. So if your coaches don't know how to do that, you might be at a gym with a great jujitsu guy or a great boxer, but they're not teaching in a way that you're really going to learn. So it's not the right learning structure and it's not the right atmosphere for you. So find that first. Once you find that, when you're in the room when you're training with these different guys, you're going to find out real quick who the guys that are too big and too strong for you are. So when you roll in and you're like, look, I'm a 155er, Longo's going to watch you go with the 155ers and he's going to be like, you see that guy over there? That guy's a 155er. You're like, no, that guy's like 205. He's going to be like, well, he fights at 155. Like, so you might want to think about 135. Like, that's kind of what happens is you match up and you go, this is what the guy on fight night is actually going to be. I'm getting my butt kicked by that guy. He's way too big and strong for me. I got to go down to 45. I got to down to 35. So between your coaches and your training partners, you'll find that out pretty quick. But I think that's probably why, as much as like, you know, I get like a protective, nervous mother with like Aljo and like these guys that fight where I'm like, well, Aljo, 145 is scary. You got Brian Ortega, you got Calvin Cato, you got Max Holloway. Like he trains with enough pro guys at 145 that I'm sure he's sitting there going, I do pretty damn good with the 145 guys. You know what I mean? Like I'll do just fine. So I think that that's kind of where that comes in. So long answer to your question, but hopefully that helped a little bit.
No, totally. Can you talk a little bit about your hand injury and how that impacted your journey through this?
Yeah, man. So it's crazy. So I thought I was going to be an air marshal. I had to get a criminal justice degree, and I was sure I was going to use that to do like, I joke around and tell everybody I tested for FBI, DEA, ATF, FAA, CIA, NYPD, everything with 3 or 4 letters, like I tested for. And then, you know, I had this hand injury where I was doing construction while I was waiting to get called in because the way like the academies work, they only go in like at certain times, and sometimes it's once every few years. So you're like on this waiting list of like, hey, you're number 60, but the next class doesn't go in until next August. So you have to find something to do in the meantime. So I got into construction because my thought process was I would like to do something that has some sort of sense of purpose. So my plan was right around that time, they were supposed to start building the Freedom Tower. And I was like, I would love to have said, I was part of that. You know, I have kids yet, but hopefully one day I turn to my dog and I go, hey, this is something I like. I put a screw in that building or I put that door up, just something to be proud of, you know? And like those are usually union jobs, which meant I would be able to get into some union. So I started doing construction and I walked in one day and I told him, I'll never forget it because I remember like normally if there was nothing to do, I was the first guy who was like, I'll just go to the beach if there's no work for me today. But that day I was like, oh, you got anything for me to do? He's like, man, it's kind of slow. There's not much for you. And I was like, you know what? I'm here. Just find something for me to do. So they put me on a machine that I'd never worked on before. And the machine had a safety failure on it. So I was like cleaning some of the stuff off of like the machine and the safety failed and it came down and it crushed my hand. And it was one of those things where I had to tell everybody what happened. I had to go to the hospital. And I remember going in and like thinking like, man, this is pretty bad. But my initial thought was like, I thought I was going to bleed to death. So it was just like, get there, see a doctor. But I didn't know, like, I think I thought things were still going to be okay. And I remember when I was going into surgery, I took out my phone, which is probably like a Nokia or a flip phone at the time or something. But I remember I changed my screen to 2010-5-1, which at the time, I'll never forget, like I was taking a real estate seminar. And like I'd taken a bunch of classes and I was like learning stuff and I was doing stuff, but I wasn't really like, just like the fighting. I was kind of taking the easy way out. I wasn't really giving it my all. And then somebody had told me like at that time, it was like for every 20 deals you look at, like 5 offers will get or like 10 offers will get accepted. 5 of them you go to due diligence on, like 1 of them will be a deal. So I remember I put that on my phone because I was like, if I make it through this, the first thing I want to see when I wake up is 2010-5-1, meaning you better get your ass up and go find some real estate because it's looking like the construction thing and the law enforcement thing aren't going to work out anymore with your hand injury. And so I was like, that was like a huge catalyst. Like my only thought was, I wish I would have bought more real estate. I wish I would have invested more. I wish I would have done stuff. So when I got out and now it became, I was home for like a year, maybe even longer with nothing to do because I just had surgery after surgery after surgery. And then one day was occupational therapy. Then the next day was physical therapy. It opened my eyes to a couple of things of like, one was I was the guy who was home every day. So like my friends that were like trying to avoid their wives or just avoid their jobs or were just bored to hang out, I almost became like a counselor. Like I couldn't go anywhere. So they would come over with like beers and they would drink and they would just talk. And I was listening to people like a long version of this is like there'd be one guy who'd come over like early on and he'd be like, man, I love my girlfriend so much. Things are so great. And then 2 months later, he'd be like, I'm kind of bored. I saw this other chick at work and she's kind of hot. And then like he'd cheat on her with them. Then he'd be like, man, I made such a bad decision. Like, how could I have ever done this? I loved her so much. And then 2 months later, it was like, I'd do anything for her to take me back. And then they take her back. And then at the end of the year, it's like, oh, I'm bored. I met this other chick. And I'm like I watched this whole thing. So like I paid attention. I started learning a lot about like self-sabotage and people's cycles. And I listened to people like not being happy with their jobs and not being happy with their work. And I would help out on picket lines for guys in the construction union I was in. And they would all give me the same advice in the morning. Like, dude, you're young. If I were you, I wouldn't spend the next 20, 25 years doing construction. Like, go buy some real estate, go buy some real estate, go buy some real estate. And then my mom made me read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I remember like thinking like, hey, no money down, no credit, assets versus liabilities. Like this is something I can do. And then I decided like the only way I can make my future secure, because now I'm realizing I thought I was going to be in law enforcement and now I can't because of the hand injury. And then I thought I was going to do construction and I can't even do that because of the injury. And then both of my parents that had secure jobs lost both their jobs without warning. And so it made me realize that there was no security in anything. Even the 9 to 5 that everybody holds on to is like the secure thing is not really secure. Like somebody can take that away from you at any time. And that was before artificial intelligence. So I remember thinking the only person I can rely on is me. And the only thing I have found that you get out of it, what you put into it, is real estate. So my goal was let me go and learn everything I can. I paid for mentorships. I went to classes. I read books. And I just decided I'm going to take this next year while I don't have a job. I'm going to make myself unemployable. I'm going to do real estate. And then one day these people are going to want to call me and hire me and they're not going to be able to because they're not going to be able to afford me. And I wound up doing 8 deals in my first 6 months and I never looked back.
That is an incredible story of perseverance. I'm curious. I'm sure there's going to be some people that listen to this that are going through a pretty hard time, whether it be an injury, whether it be their health, finances, whatever. When that happened to your hand, did you know the severity of it? Of like, I don't know, are they going to have to amputate it? I mean, how bad was it? And then how did you get yourself so quickly? And maybe it wasn't quick, but how did you get yourself from a catastrophic thinking of my life is over to, hold on, my life's not over. Let me go achieve financial freedom through real estate and get that time freedom of what I want to do with my life. And there's still a whole lot of life and hope left. Like, how does somebody talk to me about that whole process?
Yeah, man. So when it first happened initially, and it was pretty gruesome because it happened very slow because the machine was off, so it was like this whole thing where unfortunately I had time to process the whole thing that was happening. And then your first instinct isn't like the reality of the situation. It's, I got to get to a doctor as fast as possible. So I remember like that was my initial thing was like, am I going to bleed to death? Like, am I going to like, those are the thoughts you're thinking of. Like, I have to get to the hospital. And then when they put you under, like, are you going to wake up? And then, so that was like my initial first thing was if I don't wake up, I remember just thinking of like all these things now that if I never had a chance to do, the regret was eating me up for like, you just feel so stupid about making all these excuses. And you realize like to call my buddy Dean Karnatzis, who's an amazing guest I should definitely set you up with, but he holds the record for like the longest a human being can run without dying. He ran from like Los Angeles to New York City without stopping. It's incredible. But he says he does races like that. He runs 300 miles every weekend to show people what they're truly capable of. Because he said at the end of people's lives, they all look back and they realize that they were playing nowhere near their true potential. And I think that's exactly what happened to me is I was in this position where I went, if this is the end of my life, I get an F because I had all these dreams and all these ambitions. And I made a whole lot of excuses why I never really achieved things that I know I was capable of achieving. And if I get another shot, I'm not going to waste that shot. So when I woke up and I realized how bad it was and what happened, there was definitely like a long adjustment period of going through the roller coaster of just being so happy to be alive, of then just being like ashamed and humiliated and scared, physically, financially, like you have your whole life's in place. And then overnight, everything's just gone and changed. And it's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay my bills? Like the criminal justice guy was my identity. Like the boxing guy was my identity. Now, what if I can't box? What if I can't do this? And the thing I got was I had so much support around me. And I think that was like one of the biggest things that helped is just realizing like you have all these people in your corner. and you're starting to look at them and they're looking at you like they're scared and they're nervous and they're terrified and they're upset. And you don't want them to feel like that. So you put on this face of like, it's all good. Like, we're going to get through this. I remember telling my mom, like, it's just a scratch. I'll be fine. Like, I'll see you after surgery and it's all going to be all good. Everything's going to get worked out. So you wind up kind of stepping up your game to affect, you want to pretend you're feeling better so the other people around you don't feel bad. And then I think you kind of fake it until you make it. But the thing you touched on was hope. And I think hope to me was a thing where, like, when real estate came around and the doctors started talking about, hey, it's wartime. And during wartime, like, all this new medical stuff comes out. And like, you're young, like when you're 50, 60, who knows what type of things are going to come out that you can like have a fully functional hand again. And so there was like a lot of optimism for like down the line. It's all good. But I was just so grateful and thankful for every day and every opportunity that I stopped not paying attention to what I didn't have. And I started paying attention to what I did. And I think that was really like the biggest thing. Is one of my old business partners, Joe, I remember he told me he got diagnosed with cancer like a very early age. And he said he went to the doctor and the doctor was like, sit down, man. You have stage whatever cancer. He's like, here's the reality. You can take this good or you can take this bad. But either way, you're about to take it. That's your choice. And I remember, like, I think about that of like, and like another huge thing was like, people come up to you when they see that you got like a bandaged hand or you're like at physical therapy or you're like the hand doctor, and they start to ask you what happened. And at first, like, I was like annoyed that everybody was asking me. And then I started realizing that like other people were asking me because they wanted me to ask, because it was really about, they wanted to tell me their story. And you started hearing these stories of like, dude, people had it so much worse than me. And it made me remember, like, one of my favorite quotes is, I cried when I had no shoes till I met the man with no feet. And it made me just appreciate like some of the people that I'm in some of these rooms with. If they were like, dude, you're really going to like sit here and cry like a baby about a few fingers, like my leg, my eyes, my heart, my vision, my family. Like, I met a dude whose whole family died a month before in a plane crash, and he was all smiles and sunshine. You would never even know, and somebody bought me the Michael J. Fox book at the time, Lucky Man. And I remember there's like a chapter in it where the whole premise of the book is people are like, oh my God, poor Michael J. Fox. He's got Parkinson's and he's got this and he's got that. And he's so sad. It's so sad. It's so sad. And he's like, hold on. I'm a freaking movie star. Like, and I'm a famous movie star. And I've been famous and rich my whole life. And I got a beautiful wife and awesome kids. And like, my life is amazing. And like the one chapter in it, he talks about how everybody goes to heaven and they're like sitting around a campfire with God or Jesus or whoever the person's supposed to be at that time. And they're all complaining about, I can't believe you did this to me. I can't believe you gave me this. I can't believe you made this happen. And he goes, look, here's the deal. I'm going to let everybody take the next 10 minutes and you guys can all take your biggest problem and you can give it to somebody else around the fire. Everybody switch and I'll see you in 10 minutes. And he comes back 10 minutes later and he goes, okay, whose problem does everybody have? And they all took back their own. And he was like, so like, that's kind of stuff where I think about is like, yes, this sucks, but compared to what? It could be worse. How could it be worse? Be happy it's not worse and just kind of be okay with it and just, be somebody people want to be around. Like, look for the possibilities, look for the opportunities, The negativity would have killed me at that time.
Yeah, I think Jason Hartman, who's also a part of Family Mastermind, his famous question is always, compared to what? And I think hear all these sayings of comparison is the thief of joy, right, in a negative context. But it is all about how you use the frame. It's just like saying money is the root of all evil. Well, yeah, if you use money to do bad things and fuel addiction and whatever, it's going to be bad, right? It's all about the frame in which you process something, and you do have a choice of how you handle that, right? You're not going to change the situation, but you do have a choice on how you're going to move forward, how you're going to adapt. So fast forward here into this is kind of the spark that gets you into real estate, it sounds like.
100%. Yeah, 100%. If it wasn't for this, I would not be. That's why, I mean, like, everything happens for a reason. You don't know it or appreciate it at the time, but all that stuff, I felt like it was a life lesson that I was not learning. And so they made this big, like, divine intervention to be like, do you get it now? So I feel like it had to happen because I wasn't paying attention. I was being stubborn. So I needed like a giant slap across the face to be like, I'm just going to put you on this direction because you're not taking the cues.
Yeah. So now you split time between New York and Chicago. Chicago's your main investing market. You've done everything from sub-2, land development, lease options, mobile home parks, wholesales, flips. You've been doing this virtually since 2006, 2007, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. So like, it's weird. Like, I watch guys like you, man. I feel like I haven't done anything, but yeah, I feel like I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. Like I'm not great at anything, but over the years, I have a lot of experience with a lot of different things. And if there's one thing I can say, like, I'm like proud of what I did, it's I started investing remotely before investing remotely was like a thing, like now Zoom and FaceTime and all this stuff, like that stuff wasn't around there. So I had to figure out a lot of stuff that wasn't there for me at the time by making a lot of mistakes and doing things the wrong way to figure out how to do it the right way. And if I wouldn't have had that happen, like I remember I started out in New York trying to invest in like New York and the surrounding areas. And like I grew up like 10 minutes outside JFK Airport. So it's like, where am I going to invest? Long Island, Queens, like the most expensive real estate in the world, the most competitive market in the world. And I have no money, no credit, no experience. So my initial thing was like, but I want a house in New York. I need to be able to see it. I need to be able to see it and feel it and all these things, which is like what most people think when they first start is it has to be in my backyard. And then I remember after months of getting no deals, I was like, you know what? Like, I just need a paycheck now. Like, it doesn't matter where the deal is. And that's when I started to learn about investing in some of these other markets and my risk tolerance. Like, now I understand, like, if a deal's a deal, somebody's going to fund it. But my risk tolerance at the time was, hey, it's easier for me if I get like a 30, 40, $50,000 house in Georgia or in Vegas or in Michigan or in North Carolina and put $30,000 into that and sell it for 150, 180, 190. Like to me, that felt less risky. So it made me start to take more action and just, it seemed like it was easier to get deals because there was less competition there. And so it kind of forced me. And I was upset about it at first because I was like, I didn't sign on for this. Like I signed on for being able to do deals like in Nassau County and be able to see these things. And then you look at the fact that that taught me to only look at certain things like market stats and numbers and be less emotionally involved in like what and where it is. And I feel like that taught me to look for opportunities that I would have never seen if all I did was invest in my own backyard. And that allowed me to like expand that operation and repeat that process all over the country for like years and years and years and years and years. Like I tell everybody, for me, real estate markets are like ponds where there's going to be times that you have a bunch of fish in your pond and there's going to be other times that the pond dries up or everybody in town hears that that's where all the fish is. So now they're all fishing in that pond. If that's the only pond you have to fish in, you're going to starve to death. But if you know how to recreate that pond and catch fish all over the country, you don't have to catch 100 fish in one pond. You can get 10 in Georgia, 10 in North Carolina, 10 in Idaho, and you can have a pretty good year. So that's kind of how I spent the majority of my business. I still do that with the commercial stuff, but I am also understanding now the principles of in a transitioning market the way it is now, it's almost too much work to try and like, by the time you learn a new market now, it might have already changed. So I am trying to get a lot more deeper now on my current market in the Chicago suburbs to really master that market, know it easy to have more of a streamline and a pipeline of single family there. And then just some of the wholesaling and some of the wholesaling for commercial stuff in some of these other markets.
So how long did it take if you start taking action in 06, 07? That was kind of a tumultuous time to get into real estate right before the bottom fell out. When did you do your first deal and did you experience any of that?
Oh yeah. So I tell everybody that real estate market crash, that was my fault. Like every time I make the decision to start to do something, it falls apart. It's like Nick got in, we're all getting out. So I remember it's like right around that time where, I started trying to get these deals and, people were telling me like, I think I put out like 300 offers or something like that. And it was like, eFax had just come out. And I remember thinking like eFax technology can never get better than that. Like this is as good as it's ever going to get. So, but it took so much time to like, I'd have the Fannie Mae documents and then I have to like upload a signature and then I have to eFax it back. And then there was the 14-page addendum and I did like 300 offers like that, but they would literally eFax them back. Like like I would get these angry things written across the contract. Go screw yourself. We will never accept this. Everybody was like, you're getting in. It's the worst time. You should be getting out. And so I wound up having to find, there was still this like weird point where I would go to get deals and you could still start to get some deals where like within that first few months around like 2006, 2007, I could get deals in Vegas where they would do things, say like, you can get the deal with those still like no money down, those ninja loans, no income, no job, no credit check. So we'll give you a loan. And they'd be like, just sign here that you make like $15,000 a month. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't have a job. They're like, yeah, but everybody does this. It's a liar's loan. Just sign here. So I was like, okay. They're like, well, if you're going to buy one, why don't you just buy four? Because they're going to appreciate so much in 6 months. So like, I was like the guy who believed everything everybody said. So
Sure.
I would buy the property. But then what was cool is we negotiated that the seller would give you a check at closing. So I'd get these deals, no money down, and they would give me money. And then I would take that money and put that now into some fix and flips that I was going to do in another market that were going to be used for the burst strategy. So I was like, cool, this will be like the difference between what the hard money lender needs and what I can put in. But at that time, because I was out on disability, I had to start getting credit partners. So I would start LLCs, and then I would have to bring in credit partners because the banks were getting a lot more strict about who they would lend to or not. And I didn't have the credit, but I had the resources and I had the knowledge. So I would have people sign on as like a credit partner. They'd co-sign as like a member of my LLC. And then collectively as the LLC, the hard money lender would give us money. And then I would see, like, when I would go to refinance on the BRRRR, all of a sudden the banks would be like, well, 3 months ago when we told you that's what we were doing, we don't do that anymore. Like, now there's no more cash outs. All we'll do is rate in terms. And they'd be like, well, we rate in term, but we only rate in term if you have like an 800 credit. Like, so it became harder and harder and harder to get out of these deals, which is like why I always tell people now with the burst strategy, like, if you're going to do it, make sure you go talk to a lender first and make sure it's a deal you're going to be able to get out of. Because if you don't buy it the right way, you get, and it was a little bit of a different market there, where I think now people are a little bit more smart about how if you would get into a deal like that, you would at least have like equity in there, or you bought it at like 80% of the value so you could sell it. Whereas in those days, it was like they'll give you a loan for 120% of the value of the home. You know what I mean? So then it's like you default on that. And it's like, well, you can't sell it. You can't rent it. The mortgage rate just adjusted. So like, what the hell you do? The only beautiful part about that is, like, at the end of the day, lenders were willing to negotiate with you and find deals to make the deals work and stuff like that, because they were losing everything. So it became like one of those things where, again, like, you tell everybody, it's not about how do you handle yourself when things are good. It's how do you handle yourself when things are bad. And there was a lot of like really tough lessons of things that I was struggling with, because at that time you didn't have masterminds and Facebook groups and people to go to. Like, you felt like you were alone on the island, and anybody that I had to reach out to, they really didn't know. Like, everybody was kind of in the same boat of like, yeah, man, like, I thought it was all good and now apparently it's not. And like, I got my own fires I have to put out. I don't know how to help you. So it was a tough time. But I mean, some of the deals that we held on to during that time, like, they're incredible deals today. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, is like, it was, if you can get deals in tumultuous times and you can navigate those waters, when everybody jumps back in, those singles become grand slams, man. So there was definitely light at the end of that tunnel.
How did that go, your first few deals then, right? Because you're fresh off of this life-altering injury, and then the market's crashing. That, I mean,
yeah.
Talk about back-to-back things to happen to you. I'm sure, knowing who you are and your mindset, I'm sure there's an element of, I'm playing with house money. Like, the moment of what I've experienced in my life and this injury that's happened to me has prepared me to go into war times and deal with, hard things. But still, for that to happen back to back, that's got to be extremely difficult, if not crippling for most people. How did that all end up, and how did you navigate that?
You adapt, you know what I mean? It was some of those things where some of the deals I bought in partners to kind of refinance that into different properties. Some of them we wound up losing. Some of them they gave you like a tax write-off for. And like, so there was a little bit of a mixed bag of nuts of how we got through some of them. Some of them we were able to sell. What wound up saving me with some of the partners and stuff that were involved with some of these properties, you were able to still cash flow because you got them so cheap. So some of them I just had to just change the way we took the money out and be like, look, I know we were going to flip these in 6 months, but that's really not going to happen now. But I have a tenant in and it's cash flowing. So there was guys that I paid like half or all of the income in for like years to keep the properties afloat. And then eventually it got to the point where it was like, okay, like the market started to correct a little bit. I can get a good loan on this. I can refinance out to a new lender, and then I would cash them out. And some of them were okay taking like no cash flow, but they wanted their money back with interest at the end of it. So you had to find lenders that were willing to play the game with you and stick with you. And I did luckily have a bunch of those. But then the other part was like, how do you make money? Like, if these things are going there and you're trying to just like save these deals from collapsing. And that's when I got into wholesaling. Like, literally, I remember I called my mentor at the time. And I was like, dude, I got another deal under contract. Like, what do I do? Because everything that happened with my hand, I was in this scarcity mentality where I felt like every deal I got was going to be the last deal I ever had. And like, I had to keep every one because it was never going to be another one. And I remember he was like, dude, you got equity, but you don't have any cash. And like, everything's falling down around you. Like, wholesale this deal, make some money, like pay back some debt, pay off a contract, or like do these different things. And I literally was like, I don't think that works. And I'm going to show him it doesn't work. So out of spite, I literally went to go wholesale one of these deals to pay the mentor that I paid all this money to prove that he was wrong, which is so stupid if you think back. So I did it and I wound up wholesaling it. And I was like, holy crap, like that was actually pretty easy. That worked. That was like really great. And then I realized I didn't have to stop the pipeline I had of putting out offers, putting out offers, putting out offers, because I didn't want to stop putting out offers. That was the whole thing, is like every day I was putting out more, putting out more, putting out more. And people were like, well, stop. I'm like, but it took me all this time to like train these realtors and to get these markets running. I don't want to just stop this pipeline of deals and have to restart it. And that's when that light bulb clicked of like, you don't have to stop that pipeline. You just need to wholesale them when they come in until you clean up this mess over here. And that led me into wholesaling like turnkey properties and then distressed properties and properties that people were going to burn themselves that had better credit and had better assets. And then people started bringing me like portfolios. And then I started wholesaling like portfolios of single family homes and stuff like that. And then eventually the market started to bounce back and like people started getting FHA loans and stuff if they hadn't had a bankruptcy or foreclosure in the last 2 years and they had a 60 credit score or better. So then you started to say like, well, actually, I don't have to wholesale this one. I can actually fix it up. And now we're in this market where people can actually get loans again, because there was that weird, if I could go back again, like I would have opened my eyes to when people aren't getting loans, you're selling property to investors. And when people are getting loans, then you can sell your property to retail buyers. So it just would have been a little bit more of that switch that I found that I wish I would have dug a little bit harder into kind of just selling more turnkey stuff to investors. But that's kind of what happened is I wound up wholesaling. And then the market bounced back and we went right back into flipping. But then I started flipping and wholesaling and doing like, so you start getting all these other little tools in your tool belt. And then eventually I got into multifamily and wholetailing and all this other stuff. And here we are today with all these other things between wins and losses and experiences and stuff. And now I'm on the Weimer Investment Podcast with one of the smartest guys I know.
I appreciate that, man. So before we get into what you're all doing today and how people can find out more about you, how long did it take? You're recovering from this hand injury. You have a lot of time on your hands. You're getting the grindstone, pumping out deals. And then the market crashes. You're in this big hole that you got to dig yourself out of. How long did it take from the time that you started wholesaling to pay everybody off and get back to neutral or get back to a position of financial strength? Like what time frame are we talking here?
Man, it's interesting. I probably say things probably level, like for everything to really like level out, probably took like 2 years if I look back. But I mean, that time of my life feels like a blink of an eye now. You know what I mean? But it's interesting because I don't feel like it ever changed. I feel like the second you start to get out of like these deals and get ahead, you borrow more money for like a bigger deal and then you have like a bigger problem. So even like the development deal I was talking to you about, like, I feel like for the last 6 months, I've been in a hole still. Like even it's a bigger hole, it's a different hole, but it's just another hole like than it was. Like those were little holes in Michigan then. This was like a huge hole in Chicago now. And then we sold that. So I feel like I continually still go into seasons of like, I'm killing it. I got all this cash coming into like, holy crap, now I have all these deals in process and they're not selling or whatever's happening. And now I owe all this money again in the next 3 months. I better do something. So I feel like it's been like every like 6 to 9 months, it's like dig a hole, get out of a hole, dig a hole, get out of a hole. And when you come out, like you go a little bit higher, you do a little bit better. But I can't remember a single point where I sat down and I was like take a deep breath. Like it's all good. I got it, because as soon as that deal closes, you need another one. And now it's a whole other thing. And the anxiety cycle starts over and over again. So it's really kind of always been the same thing since day one. It's just kind of better problems, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think what's so cool about real estate is the freedom of choices that you have. Like there is always another exit that you can pivot to. It might require some difficult conversations with your lenders. You might have to be okay with the fact you're about to disappoint some people temporarily, whether it's turn it into a rental, commercial, apartments, wholesale it, flip it, restructure the debt on it. We did a property a couple weeks ago where guy owned it free and clear. We negotiated 0% seller finance and a payment with no balloon. So it's like a 25-year note. We got him to allow us to secure that note against one of our rental properties so that that property we can flip, sell it, realize all the liquid cash, and still have that 0% note for 25 years. So now we can take this $350,000 in cash, go pay off another property, go buy more assets, invest in marketing, invest in people. That's just one deal. And so there's levels to this stuff. And what I love about real estate is because everybody needs shelter and it's not going away, and the housing shortage is about to get even worse because people have paused building the last couple of years with really high interest rates. This is an asset class that's ready to explode. And you also have elements of it that you can negotiate. You can have the control. Like the government can't have as much control in real estate as it does other asset classes. You get to be the captain of the ship and do all these different cool things where truthfully you're one deal away from completely changing your life. And I don't know of any other asset class that can provide that. So in addition to all the other things that it offers.
That was beautifully said, sir. That was awesome.
Yeah. So take me to today. What are you up to today? What kind of deals are you looking for? What are you doing? I know you mentioned some hiring and firing as of late.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah,
have
man.
going on?
So when the as the development deal was going, my business partner made me promise not to like take on any like big projects until that one sold because you drop the ball on a 50, like things get bad fast. So that's when I got into wholesaling. So I'm still wholesaling commercial deals. So people contact me all the time. Like I was just talking to, I think somebody yesterday about like a 20 single family portfolio package that I'm in the middle of working with. And so like small to mid-size mobile home parks, small commercial projects. I'm helping other people in markets like Austin, Texas or California. They'll call me and they'll say, look, I have equity in the home, but if I pull the equity, like I can't really afford to get anything good in my area or there's no inventory in my area. So I need to find something like a little bit bigger that gets some better cash flow outside of my network. And I have no idea how to do that. So they'll come to me and I'll help them find stuff in a different market in the country that kind of fits their buy box or their risk tolerance because everybody's in a different place. While we're doing that, we just sold the development deal. So freed up some cash, freed up some time. And what we did is we used that now to hire some people because my goal is to pick up as many buy and holds as I possibly can within the Chicago suburbs or a little bit of Florida too, but mostly Chicago suburbs. So we've been pitching hard for sub two deals, seller finance deals. So right now what I'm doing is I'm taking all of our old data and I'm just having a cold caller go through all of it. And as soon as somebody's interested again, my acquisition guy gets on, basically pitches them a cash offer, pitches them a terms offer. If they take the offer and it makes a good wholesale, I'll wholesale it. If it makes a good rental or a good creative deal, I'll keep it. If it's a flip, I'll wholesale it because I really just don't want to take on any big projects right now. They're going to take time. But I'm blown away how many people have been open. Like this one deal I'm in the middle of trying to negotiate right now. Shout out to Nick Legamaro. He's been helping me with it. But it was one of those things again where I was like, hey, man, we'll pay you, I forget what it was, like $2,000 a month. The house is worth like $550. And I was like, dude, we'll buy it from you for $427 and I'll pay you $2,000 a month for 14 years. And he accepted it, so he's second thoughts now encountering a little bit for down payments and we're dealing back and forth with it. But there's more and more, like I have so many deals I have to get back to my guy with today of like, hey, they wouldn't take the cash, but they are open to the terms. So I'm very excited about trying to acquire more assets with either sub two low interest debt and keep those. Cause I think when the interest rates eventually do come down, those are going to be gold mines. So it's my main focus right now is the bigger stuff, wholesale it, the creative stuff that makes sense, keep it. And if not, wholesale it. Cause we've done a couple of 6-figure hotels out here that it's just a great market for it. So those I love too. Something nice and easy. I can just clean up and turn it down, put it right back in the market and sell it. That's what I'm into. And I plan on learning a little bit more about novations too, to add that to my arsenal soon.
Love that, man. What does a wholesale deal look like on some of those big commercial portfolios?
It's pretty awesome. So like I usually what I'll do is I'll find out like what they want as an acceptable rate of return. So I'll figure out like what's your cap rate or your cash on cash. And then what I'll figure out is like I'll use my calculators or whatever to reverse engineer like, okay, if they are happy with like a 7.5 cap, what does it look like if I get this deal at a 6.5? And I basically just play with the numbers because sometimes in some of these bigger deals, like if they want it at a 7 and I'm getting it at a 6, like it could be $100,000 spread. So
Yeah.
I'm seeing generally between like $50,000 to $150,000 wholesale fees on these. And like, so generally what I'll do is I'll say like, well, first off, I need you to get approved with my lender because I'm not going to put all this. It's not like a single family home. Like it takes a lot of work. I got to find stuff. I got to do stuff. And it's almost like a test to see, are you willing to do anything? So they call, they get approved with a lender. I figure out like, what experience do you have? Are you looking to find something stable or are you looking to find something you could fix up? Because obviously everybody wants these amazing returns. And I go, well, like if you're going to buy stabilized already though, you can't expect to get the type of, so I have to have like a realistic conversation for this is what you will really get unless you're willing to do these things, which it doesn't sound like you are, but so you kind of have that come to Jesus moment. Once you've agreed on that, then we start to talk about some markets. Then I start to just put the feelers out for some deals. And then I just start to send them to see like what their feedback is. Are they realistic? Are they actually interested? Or are they just going to kind of blow me off and not do anything? And once they start giving me feedback on what they want, they become a little bit more of my priority because I know they're actually like communicating now, they're doing things. And then the deal I make is like, once you're on board with this deal, I'll make like a video with a spreadsheet with all the numbers, and I'll say, hey, here's what you would be into it for. Here's what your pro forma is. Here's what your stabilizations would be. I'll help you find 3 property managers, 3 maintenance guys, 3 lenders, 3 insurance guys, 3 contractors. I'll schedule the walkthroughs. I'll do all the videos. I'll upload them to you, and then I'll give you my opinion on what could go right and what could go wrong. And then if you want to move forward with this, I can link you up with the lenders again. And then once you close on it, I'll get my fee at closing. You don't care because you were good with these numbers. So whatever I make on it, it's all good. But once you close on it, I walk away from the deal and it's all you. And like what I've been going one step further to is I even make like a kind of a, now I do like a break in case of emergency of if you don't take care of the building of the property manager the right way, here's the things that can go wrong and here's the people you would call. And some of them still don't do any of it. So I feel like I provide a service during that like 30 to 45 day period that nobody really cares if I'm making money on it because I set them up for success as best I could to explain like the real pros and cons of that deal.
100%, guys. So if you are looking for another state or maybe another asset class to move your money into, Nick is your guy. I mean, clearly that is huge value. I can't tell you how many people reach out to me that are buying properties in other states and are asking me what my thoughts are and maybe areas that they have family next to or just that they're looking to trade maybe a lower cap rate for a higher cap rate, get some more cash flow, whatever it is. Nick, what's the best way for people to reach out to you and to find you?
I appreciate that, man. So if you go to the easiest website in the world, nicknicknick.com/links, LINKS. It's got all the ways to follow the podcast and all the ways to connect with me on social media, all those different things. And if you would like to talk to me about actually investing in a property, you can shoot me a text message with the words real estate to 516-540-5733, 516-540-5733. But nicknicknick.com/links is the best way to connect with me pretty much everywhere.
I can tell you guys, there are not many people that are doing stuff at this high of a level with this level of experience that have their hands in multiple markets. So this is an insane amount of value. Make sure that you go to nicknicknick.com. You won't forget that one. So Nick, it was a pleasure having you and see you on the next one. Peace.
Man, it was a pleasure to be on, man. I've been following you for a long time. You were one of the most inspiring guys out there. I love all the content you're doing. Your brain, your business, everything about me is like, it's always like impressive to me, man. And I look forward to catching a UFC fight with you soon, sir. Thank you for having me on.
Hell yeah, man. Let's do it.
Awesome.
So yeah.